The first thing I noticed was how quiet the house felt when I walked. In the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you aware of your own breathing. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I stepped inside my mother's living room, holding my purse a little tighter, already sensing that this wasn't the family dinner she'd insisted on. The curtains were drawn even though it was still daylight outside, and the smell of overcooked rice hung faintly in the air. Everyone was already there, sitting, waiting. That was when my stomach dropped. My older brother, avoided my eyes completely. My aunt kept smoothing her skirt over and over like she was nervous. And my mother, my own mother, sat at the head of the room with her hands folded in her lap, her face calm in a way that felt rehearsed. That's when I knew this wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. I stood there for a few seconds too long. My keys still in my hand, wondering how I'd walked so willingly into a trap. My mother smiled at me, not warmly, not lovingly, but with that thin, patient smile she used when she thought she was about to teach someone a lesson. "Sit down," she said softly. "We just want to talk." I sat because I was raised to respect her, because some part of me still believed that whatever this was, it couldn't be that bad, because I didn't yet know how far they were willing to go. If I had known, I would have walked straight back out that door. Before all of this, my life was ordinary, quiet even. I worked long hours as a project coordinator at a logistics firm. Not glamorous, but steady. I paid my bills on time, kept my small apartment neat, and called my mother every Sunday like clockwork. I wasn't married. No children. Just me and the routines that made life feel predictable. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. But I thought we had an understanding. I was the responsible one. The one who didn't ask for help. The one who handled her own business and didn't complain. My brother Daniel was the opposite. He'd always been the golden child. Charming, impulsive. Forever in some kind of trouble that my mother insisted wasn't really his fault. Growing up, she'd excuse everything he did with a sigh and a shake of her head. He just needs support. She'd say support usually meant money, or time, or forgiveness that never quite ran out. I learned early on not to expect much. I learned how to be self-sufficient because no one else was going to do it for me. Still, despite everything, I trusted my mother. Maybe not blindly, but enough. The inheritance changed everything. It came from my father's side of the family, my grandfather to be precise. He'd passed away quietly, leaving behind a modest but meaningful estate. A house that had been sold, some investments, and a clear, legally documented decision. The inheritance was mine, not split, not shared. Mine. My grandfather and I had been close in a quiet way. He'd listen more than he talked, and when he did speak, it was usually something thoughtful. Before he died, he'd squeezed my hand and said, "You've always stood on your own feet. I wanted to make sure you stay that way." I never told my family those words. I should have known that money has a way of making people listen to things they've ignored for years. At first, nothing seemed different. My mother mentioned the inheritance casually once or twice, always in a neutral tone. "Such a blessing," she said on the phone one evening. "Your grandfather was very wise." Then came the suggestions. "Daniel's been struggling," she said another time. "Just until he gets back on his feet." I didn't answer right away. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. I told her I'd think about it. That's when the pressure started to build. The calls became more frequent. The tone shifted, subtle at first, then sharper. My aunt chimed in, then my cousin. Everyone had an opinion on what I should do with money that wasn't theirs. "You don't even need all of it." My mother said once, her voice almost offended, "Family helps family." I tried to explain. I had plans. Student loans are still lingering. A down payment I'd been saving toward. Security I'd never had growing up. She listened without really hearing me. So when she called that week and said, "Let's all sit down together." No pressure. Just a family discussion. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Back in that living room, my mother cleared her throat. "We're all here because we care about you," she began. "And because we need to make some decisions as a family." I felt my chest tighten. Daniel finally looked at me then, his expression carefully neutral, like he'd already practiced what he was about to say. My aunt leaned forward. "We think it's only fair," she said, "that the inheritance be shared. At least partially." I stared at them one by one, waiting for someone to laugh. To say this was a misunderstanding, no one did. "I'm not handing it over," I said quietly. Surprised at how steady my voice sounded, the room shifted nide. My mother's smile vanished. That was the moment. Everything changed. My mother's face hardened in a way I hadn't seen since I was a teenager being scolded for talking back. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "No one is asking you to hand everything over." "That's exactly what you're doing," I replied. "You just used nicer words." Daniel shifted in his seat. He let out a small laugh, the kind meant to sound harmless. "Come on, we're family. You're acting like we're strangers trying to rob you." That word, rob, hung in the air longer than it should have. I looked at him then, really looked. The faint stubble on his jaw, the tired eyes, the confidence of someone who had always known someone else would clean up his mess. I wondered how many times my mother had already promised him money that wasn't hers to promise. My aunt crossed her arms. "You've always been selfish," she said suddenly, her voice sharp. "Even as a child, always thinking ahead, always hoarding." That one hurt more than I expected. I felt heat rise up my neck. Planning for my future isn't hoarding. My mother raised her hand, signaling everyone to calm down, like she was some neutral referee. "This is exactly why we wanted to meet in person." "You're being emotional." I almost laughed. "Emotional." I said, "You tricked me into coming here. You didn't tell me what this was about." She tilted her head. "If I had, you wouldn't have come." There it was. The truth slipped out like it was nothing. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change how I saw her. This wasn't a concern. This was strategy. "I'm not doing this," I said, standing up. The inheritance was left to me legally, intentionally. Daniel stood too, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "So that's it. You just get to sit on a pile of money while the rest of us struggle." I turned to him. "You've been struggling for 15 years. The room erupted. My aunt gasped. My cousin muttered something under his breath. My mother's voice rose for the first time. "How dare you speak to him like that? How dare you?" I said, my hands shaking now. "Pretend this is about fairness." My mother's eyes filled, but not with sadness. With anger. "You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for this family," she said. "We raised you." I swallowed hard. "You raised me to be independent. Remember?" Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Then my mother leaned forward, lowering her voice. "If you walk away from this, don't expect things to stay the same." This wasn't a threat wrapped in kindness. It was just a threat. I picked up my purse. If things staying the same means being manipulated, then maybe they shouldn't. I walked out before anyone could stop me. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking too badly to start it right away. I just sat there, breathing, staring at the front door of the house I'd grown up in. That night, I cried. Not because I felt guilty, but because I finally understood how conditional their love had been. The fallout came quickly by morning. My phone was full of messages. Long paragraphs from my mother about disappointment. Short, passive-aggressive notes from my aunt. One from Daniel that simply read, "I didn't think you'd choose money over us." I didn't respond. Instead, I called a lawyer, saying the words out loud, "My family is pressuring me to give up my inheritance." Made my stomach twist. But the lawyer was calm, practical. He explained my rights clearly and reassured me that everything was airtight. "You don't owe anyone anything," he said. I repeated that sentence to myself all week. That didn't stop them from trying. They showed up at my apartment unannounced one Saturday morning. My mother stood in the hallway like she owned the place. "We need to talk," she said. "No," I replied. "You had your meeting." Daniel scoffed. You're really going to shut us out like this? I'm protecting myself. I said, my mother's voice softened, then too soft. You're being influenced by fear, by lawyers who don't care about family. I looked at her, really looked. You didn't care about your family when you lied to me. That was when her tone changed again. If you don't do the right thing, she said quietly, people will hear our side of the story. And they did within days. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were calling. Friends of the family suddenly stopped responding to my messages. At a cousin's birthday party I attended out of obligation, conversations went quiet when I entered the room. I became that person. The ungrateful one. The greedy one. What none of them knew was how carefully this narrative had been built, how my refusal had been framed as cruelty instead of self-preservation. The worst part wasn't the gossip. It was the why my mother stopped calling altogether. No Sunday check-ins. No small updates. Just silence, sharp and deliberate. I spent many nights staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, wondering if I should have handled it differently, wondering if peace was worth the price they were asking. Then, one afternoon, I received a message that made my blood run cold. It was from my cousin. You should know. Mom says they're planning something. Legal. My heart sank. They weren't done. I read that message at least 5 times before it sank. And they're planning something. Legal. The word echoed in my head all evening. Legal meant paperwork, courtrooms, public records. It meant taking something private and dragging it into places where strangers could dissect it. Without knowing the full story, that night I barely slept. Every creak of my apartment sounded louder than usual. The hum of the refrigerator felt intrusive. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying memories I'd never questioned before. Moments where my mother had steered conversations, nudged decisions, positioned herself quietly at the center of everything. I realized something unsettling. This wasn't sudden. It was just the first time I'd said no. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. He listened patiently as I explained the message, the pressure, the rumors. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. It wouldn't surprise me. He said carefully, if they're considering contesting the will or claiming undue influence. I felt my throat tighten, but my grandfather was clear. He was of sound mind. I know, he replied, and the documentation supports that. But people can still file claims, even weak ones. Weak or not, I knew what it would do. It would force me to defend myself against my own family publicly. Within a week, I received official notice my mother was listed as a petitioner. Seeing her name typed out like that, formal, cold, did something to me. It stripped away the last illusion that this was just emotional pressure gone too far. She was willing to put her signature on a document that accused me, indirectly, of manipulation. Daniel called that evening. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me needed to hear his voice to confirm this was real. You didn't have to let it go this far, he said without greeting. You mean I didn't have to refuse? I replied. He exhaled sharply. You could have helped. Just a portion. Mom wouldn't have done this if you'd been reasonable. Reasonable? I said quietly. You mean obedient. There was a pause. You've changed. No, I said. I've just stopped bending. He hung up. The weeks that followed were exhausting in a way I hadn't known before. Not physically, emotionally. Emails from lawyers. Requests for documents. Statements to review. Every detail of my relationship with my grandfather was scrutinized. How often have I visited? Did I help him financially? Did I influence his decisions? I answered everything honestly. Still, it felt like being accused of a crime I didn't commit. What hurt most was learning what my mother had told people. According to her, I had isolated my grandfather in his final years. I had turned him against the family, had taken advantage of his kindness. None of it was true, but lies, when repeated gently and often, have a way of sounding like truth. At a family gathering, I foolishly attended a funeral for a distant relative. My mother didn't look at me. She spoke about loyalty and respect in hushed conversations meant to be overheard. I stood near the back of the room, feeling like a stranger wearing my own face. Then something unexpected happened. My grandfather's old neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, approached me. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said softly. "Your grandfather adored you." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "He used to say you were the only one who asked him what he wanted." I felt tears sting my eyes. She later agreed to write a statement. So did his former caregiver. And his attorney, slowly. The narrative began to crack. The hearing was scheduled for early spring. Walking into that courtroom felt surreal. My mother sat across from me, dressed neatly, her expression composed. Daniel sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. For a moment I felt like a child again, small, outnumbered. Then I remembered why I was there. When my mother testified, she spoke calmly about concern, about fairness, about family unity. She never raised her voice, never sounded angry. But when the judge asked why my grandfather hadn't left anything to Daniel, she hesitated. "Well," she said, "I believe he was misled." The judge turned to me. "And you?" I stood, my legs trembling slightly. "My grandfather made his choice freely. I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it, but I respected it." Spoke about our conversations, his values, his desire for independence, mine and his. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't accuse, I just told the truth. The ruling came 2 weeks later. The claim was dismissed. No undue influence. No manipulation. No wrongdoing. Legally, it was over. Emotionally, it stopped. My mother didn't call to apologize. She didn't acknowledge the outcome at all. Instead, she told relatives that the system was unfair. That money had corrupted me. That some battles weren't worth winning. I let her say it. Something in me had shifted. I no longer needed her approval to validate my decisions. I blocked numbers. I stopped attending events where I wasn't welcome. I built quiet boundaries and guarded them fiercely. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. A new normal. I moved into a modest home, paid off debts, and invested carefully. I breathed easier knowing I had security I'd never known before. One afternoon, found an old voicemail from my grandfather saved on my phone. I'd forgotten it was there. His voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm proud of you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for standing firm." I sat on the edge of my bed and cried, not from pain, but from relief. Because, for the first time, I understood something clearly. Saying no had cost me a family. But saying yes would have cost me myself. After the court decision, there was a strange calm that settled over my life, the kind that comes after a storm. When the air feels cleaner but the ground is still wet, I expected relief to come rushing in all at once. Instead, it arrived slowly in small, quiet moments. The first full night of sleep without waking up anxious. The first weekend where my phone stayed silent. The first time I realized I wasn't bracing myself anymore. But healing, I learned, isn't just about peace. It's also about grief. I grieved the mother I thought I had. The version of her who used to braid my hair before school, who stayed up late helping me rehearse presentations, who told me I was strong even when I didn't feel it. I had to accept that she was real once and that she had also become someone else. The hardest part wasn't cutting contact. It was letting go of the hope that she would suddenly understand. Weeks turned into months. Spring faded into summer. I painted the walls of my new home a soft, neutral color, something calm, something that felt like a fresh page. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I started cooking again slowly, without rushing, without background noise. In those small domestic rituals, I found myself again. Every now and then, a relative would reach out. Some cautiously, some apologetically. A few admitted they'd believed the worst about me. I didn't know the full story. They'd say, "I know." I'd reply, and I meant it. Not everyone deserves access to your truth, especially those who didn't ask for it when it mattered. One afternoon, I ran into Daniel at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, tired, the confidence he used to wear so easily had slipped. We stood there awkwardly near the produce section, the hum of refrigerators filling the silence. "You look different," he said finally. "So do you," I replied. He nodded. "Mom's been struggling." I waited. "She didn't think it would end like this," he added. I chose my words carefully. "Neither did I." He hesitated, then said, "She thought if everyone pressured you enough, you'd cave. That you always did." The honesty startled me more than anger ever could. "I don't anymore," I said quietly. He looked at the floor. "I know. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile. But when we parted, there was no bitterness, just the mutual recognition of something broken that neither of us knew how to fix." Later that night, I thought about how often families confuse control with care, how easily love turns conditional when money enters the room, how quickly people rewrite history to suit their needs. I wrote my mother a letter not to send, but to release what I'd been carrying. I wrote about betrayal, about fear, about disappointment. But I also wrote about gratitude for teaching me resilience, even if unintentionally. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, where it stayed. Some closures don't need witnesses. As the year came to a close, I volunteered at a local financial literacy program, helping young adults understand budgeting, saving, planning. I never mentioned my inheritance. I talked about boundaries, about saying no, about protecting your future even when others don't understand. A young woman once stayed after class and said, "I thought I was selfish for wanting stability." "You're not," I told her. "You're responsible." Saying those words out loud felt like healing something in myself. On my birthday, I received a card in the mail. No return address. Inside my mother's handwriting, "I still don't agree with you, but I hope you're well." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement. I sat with it for a long time before placing it beside my grandfather's old photograph, the one where he's smiling softly. Like he knows something the rest of us don't, and maybe he did, because now I understood this truth. One I wish I'd learned sooner. Inheritance isn't just money. It's values. It's permission. It's the quiet assurance that you're allowed to choose yourself. I didn't lose everything. I gained clarity. I gained independence. I gained peace. And that, I realized, was worth far more than what they tried to take from me. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. It just became honest. There were still quiet mornings when I woke up expecting my phone to buzz with my mother's name, only to remember that silence was now our language. There were still holidays that felt strange, pared down, missing familiar voices, even if those voices had once wounded me. But there was also something new, lightness. I noticed it one evening as I washed dishes in my own kitchen. The window cracked open to let in the sound of distant traffic and a neighbor's laughter. My shoulders weren't tense. My mind wasn't racing. I wasn't rehearsing arguments that might never happen. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for approval. That realization came with a grief of its own. Because when you stop waiting, you also stop hoping, and hope, even when it hurts, can feel like comfort. I started therapy not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd learned to shrink myself so easily for the sake of peace. In those sessions, I spoke about childhood moments that had once seemed harmless, being praised for not needing much, being told I was so easy compared to Daniel, being rewarded for silence. My therapist listened, then said something that stayed with me. "You were taught that love was something you earned by being convenient." That sentence settled into me slowly, like a truth I'd been circling for years. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I began practicing saying no in small ways, declining invitations I didn't want to accept, returning items without apologizing, letting conversations end without over-explaining myself. Each small boundary felt awkward at first, like wearing shoes that hadn't been broken in yet, but over time they began to fit. Daniel texted occasionally. Nothing deep. Updates about work. Complaints about mom, once. He asked for advice instead of money. That was new. She doesn't listen to me anymore, he wrote once. She's angry all the time. I typed a response, erased it, then typed again. She's responsible for her feelings. I finally sent. So are you. He didn't reply right away. Weeks later, he thanked me. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was growth, quiet, imperfect, real. As for my mother, distance softened her edges without erasing the damage. I heard through others that she'd stopped talking about the inheritance altogether, that she'd redirected her frustration toward the unfairness of life instead of me. I didn't take comfort in that. I took comfort in knowing I no longer had to absorb it. One afternoon, while sorting through old documents, I found my grandfather's will again. I read it slowly this time, not for legal reassurance, but for emotional clarity. There were no dramatic declarations, no insults, no explanations, just intention. And I realized something important. He hadn't chosen me to punish anyone else. He had chosen me because he trusted me. Trust, I learned, is one of the rarest forms of love. I honored that trust by living well, not extravagantly, not recklessly, but intentionally. I invested. I planned. I gave myself the safety net I'd never had. And when I helped others, I did it freely, without obligation, without guilt, without fear of strings. That difference mattered. On the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I visited his grave alone. I brought fresh flowers and stood there quietly, listening to the wind move through the trees. I hope I did right by you, I whispered, in that stillness. I felt something close to peace, not because everything had been resolved, but because I had. Walking back to my car, I thought about that first moment in my mother's living room. The closed curtains, the waiting faces, the trap I'd walked into believing. It was love. I understood now that refusing to hand over the inheritance wasn't the betrayal they made it out to. The real betrayal would have been abandoning myself to keep others comfortable. Some families punish you for breaking patterns. Some people only love you when you're useful. And some lessons arrive wrapped in loss. But here's what I know now. You can honor where you come from without sacrificing where you're going. And sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is stand alone long enough to find your own voice again. There are moments in life that quietly divide us into two versions of ourselves, the person we were before and the one we become after we finally choose ourselves. For me, that moment wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a simple word I'd spent my whole life avoiding. No. I used to believe family meant sacrifice without limits. That love meant compliance. That peace was something you bought by staying small. But I learned the hard way that real love does not require you to disappear. If you're listening to this and carrying guilt for protecting what's yours, your time, your peace, your future, I want you to hear this clearly. Boundaries are not betrayal. Self-respect is not selfishness. And inheritance, in any form, it's not something others are entitled to simply because they share your blood. Sometimes, the people who raised you are also the ones who test your strength the most. And sometimes walking away isn't abandonment, it's survival. I still wish things had turned out differently. I still wish love hadn't come with conditions. But I no longer regret choosing myself, because the life I'm living now, calm, intentional, honest, is proof that I did the right thing. So let me ask you something. From one heart to another, if your family asked you to give up your future to keep their approval, what would you choose? Tell me in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, supported you, or reminded you that you're not alone, please like, subscribe, and stay with this channel. Your voice matters, and so does your peace.